Interesting.
All right, welcome to this edition of the Counselor's Bookshelf. I am so excited to be with you and our guest here today, Christa Hardin, who is the author of The Enneagram in Marriage. Christa, thank you for being with us today.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much, Dr. Coonley. It was so much fun to have you on my podcast, and I'm so excited for your beautiful book. So thanks for having me.
Yes, I loved getting to know you on your podcast and through social media. I know we had a fantastic discussion there. Would you share just a little bit more about your background and who you are, so our viewers can get a chance to get to know you better?
Yes, I would love to. I got to start doing my marriage and family work very young. Some of you can probably relate to this. I was actually a kid in my own parents' home and starting to work on their marriage. And I actually enjoyed problem solving with my mom and dad. Odd as that is, I of course didn't like hard fighting, but there was just this part of me that could see, even with my parents' conversations when they would argue here and there and slam the door a little bit here and there. And I can remember feeling like I can see both hearts here. And as the youngest child of four, you spend a lot of time observing systems. And so as I shared little notes back and forth between my parents at times, my dad, who is, for those who Ennea speak, he was a Challenger 8, and he was like, you know what, you're pretty good at this. And getting a high compliment from him, he was an English teacher and professor and a debate coach. I really took that in, and he's like, you'll be a lawyer one day. But it ended up my brother's a lawyer, and I was really actually doing what I was made to do by God, which was to help couples. So of course, after that, of course, I received therapy later for being in the middle of my parents' marriage a little bit, but it really was just a little bit here and there to offer a little tips. And then I did my clinical studies and my undergraduate in psychology and a double major in communications, which I love. Now that I have my podcast, I can use both. And then I did my master's at Wheaton in clinical psychology with an emphasis on marriage and family and emotionally focused studies. And later, a Wheaton colleague really alerted me to look back at the Enneagram to say, there's some depth here. And even though we had trained on all these other great clinical assessments, she said, I think this one would really help your marriage studies even more. And she's a person of depth that I really trust therapeutically. So I looked back, and honestly, I haven't looked away since, because it's been such a life-changing tool for my couples.
Oh, that's amazing to hear that. And I love that you're able to use both your psychology background and your communications background in your work with your podcast as well, and sharing all the clinical insights you have from the Enneagram. So you said you earned your master's in clinical psychology. So do you identify as a counselor, like an LPC or a psychologist, or?
Yes, I actually don't add that credential anymore because I wanted to be more expansive. I changed over to a coach when it wasn't as popular to do both.
Right.
Now it's getting to be popular to do both, but what really happened for me was moving from Wheaton, where I was an LMFT, and then going into Detroit, where I was a limited licensed psychologist. And then when I got to Florida, I was going to be a licensed mental health counselor, and that
Yeah.
did not fit for me as a marriage specialist. So I
Mm.
went through AACC coaching training and just let myself use my clinical tools in my coaching.
Oh, yes. I love AACC. I love going to the World Conference every year. It'd be great to see you in person, maybe there next year in Nashville. Are you going to the 2025
We haven't
conference?
decided, but oh my gosh, you make me want to go. I didn't know you'd go, and that would
Oh,
be so
yes.
fun.
Yeah. And I highly recommend for all our viewers, and I always encourage my students, like every other year in Nashville, they have this huge conference, great trainings. You get to meet some of your favorite authors. And it's just great to be able to see former students and colleagues. Well, that's great. Well, I know a lot of our students are probably, they're working towards getting licensed as clinical mental health counselors. That's the program that I teach in. So they'll be able to identify with you there. And it's really neat to hear that one of your colleagues that you trusted therapeutically recommended the Enneagram, and you got interested in that. And I saw on your website it's been like several decades that you've been interested in the Enneagram before it was maybe even as popular to be interested. Well, will you share with us a little bit about what inspired you to write your newest book, The Enneagram in Marriage?
Well, I want to let you know I have been working as a marriage helper for a couple of decades, but the Enneagram I was introduced to back when Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile really had their huge book that sold over 1 million copies. And that's right around the time Willow Creek Church was doing the Enneagram, and my friend pointed it out to me. So sorry if that wasn't super clear, but I do want to let you know that I think it became a great tool because for couples, because it was so adaptive to already the good work you're doing out there to train on attachment. I think that it was already, there were so many wonderful marriage tools in place, but we're just continuing to nuance with other great tools. So I just want to remind every student, like you said, there's students watching, that keep learning all the tools, because you'll find your tool belt and this might get to be one of them. And I'm sorry, was there another piece of that question too?
Yes, but I just want to say I love what you said because there's always been this saying that, if the only thing in your toolbox is a hammer and everything looks like a nail, then you're in trouble. So really having lots of different tools is very helpful. And we know that a battery of assessments is always better than a single assessment. And we'll talk more about that a little later in our discussion. But yeah, so what would you say inspired you to write the Enneagram in Marriage at this point in your journey?
I would say that when I started to study the Enneagram and work with my couples, I started to, as you know, develop some pairing guides for every single type with every single other type. Then I decided to create a lot of freebies. Then I decided to create a certification course for coaches and counselors who wanted to really deep delve and begin to use this within their clinical practices. And it really dawned on me that the 1,000 or so pages of material that I had created was more than enough for a book for everyday people. And so that really made me feel excited, because not only was I now working with other clinicians or coaches on this, but I wanted to bring something tangible in one stop for
Mm.
my clients. And I think you get that as an author. I handed all my clients, and I share this in my book, when I first met them, I handed them a myriad of John Gottman forms, and I love Gottman's work, but
Yes.
it was, I mean, who doesn't, who's a marriage specialist, but it was really hard for them to imagine grabbing at all these packets. And so just to have a sleek, elegant way to give people homework chapter by chapter is just so inviting. I wanted to do that.
Yeah, so it sounds like, I mean, you've had a heart for couples from way
Mhm.
back, starting with your parents, and
Wow.
you saw yourself in your work giving these multiple worksheets, and it sounds like just bundling it, having a book structured, laid out chapter by chapter, was just like an organized, clear method for providing that tool for your clients. Well, I'm excited. I've enjoyed reading your book so far, and it's, by the way, it's beautiful. Do you have? I'm listening to the audiobook right now. I left the other copy in Florida. Can you show us the cover here?
Yes, I do have it. I would love to, guys. I'm so grateful for this pink book. It
Beautiful.
is so much fun to have the little wedding rings on the cover too.
Yes, that's such a beautiful shade of pink or blush, and yes, so definitely a great resource for the well-appointed counselor's bookshelf. Um, So I noticed that in the Enneagram and Marriage and some of your other writing as well, you have some other books, but you use the metaphor about shining together, creating light together, or glowing. Would you say a little bit more about that? I thought that was such a great word picture.
Oh, thank you. I really do believe that when couples are at their best, they are casting a light onto the world. And I believe that we do that individually too. It really reflects Matthew 5:16, about just the whole concept of not just hiding your light, but shining it out as that city on a hill. And when we're together, we know in community we do that better. And that includes with our partner. And I also began to notice that couples that had similar personalities to other couples I was seeing had similar ways of shining. And so that was fun for me to notice that, oh my gosh, these two really big energy people, they shine so broadly in the world. They have such a big expansiveness. Many of this pairing over here became business owners together. This pairing sort of balanced each other's big or small or introvert, extrovert energy out. And so I really decided to really look into that. And the metaphor that seemed the best for me was the ways we shine all differently, but all beautifully. There's no better shine or worse shine, but we can say sometimes within our relationships, we are brighter or darker, and we also have shadows or could hit a complete darkness where we divorce and separate. And I get that sometimes that's necessary too. But for many couples, most couples, in fact, the goal will be to help them to find their light together and individually to start to learn not just how to heal their marriage, but also how to be purposeful in their light that they cast on the world. So that's a really big passion of mine. Whereas I feel like many marriage books are just about like refinding yourself. I'm like, let's get healthy and then let's continue to bring that vision out to others, because I do know the volunteerism statistics tell us that helping others is better than just mere self-care.
Yes. So the whole idea of the two are better than one. And I love that you identified these different patterns in couples. Like you observed, oh, these shine in a similar way. And that's so interesting. It sounds like the Enneagram provides, I've heard so many people resonate with the Enneagram. And lately, it's interesting. I know you mentioned someone being an 8. And it's like everyone that I've heard lately that identifies as an 8 on the Enneagram really appreciates the Enneagram and the way it describes their character and personality. So I'm sure it's very interesting to see couples resonate and to notice the patterns and say, oh, okay, this is the 8 coming out, or this is the 1 coming out here.
Yes, it is. It gives them a language and it's not as pathological. Of course, we know we need sometimes several overlays. So sometimes we do need to look at what the corresponding DSM might be for each couple. But in my book, I actually walk through people in each type at their highest when they're just shining and thriving, as well as when we need to look at, hey, we can all get there sometimes when we're in the shadows. What does our type correspond with on some of the DSM layers and levels? So, but I love that by and large, people can feel a little less hurt in a little more person first sort of language. I even tell people that, like, if you have a spouse who identifies as a 5, try not to just say that's because you're a 5, but like, I loved how you said it, Dr. Anita, like there's the 5 coming out, there's the 8 coming out.
Yes, that's a great point, because I like that language that you most resemble a 5 or most resemble a 1. So rather than making it your full identity, it's kind of a characteristic or something, one way of describing your personality or your personhood instead of becoming your full identity per se. I think that's so important when it comes to assessments. But I really appreciate the positive psychology aspect. I want to say, just as I'm getting ready to go to the Florida Mental Health Counseling Association conference coming up very soon, and we're doing a presentation. I'm working with a colleague to talk about attachment trauma and ethics. This is one of the things we talk about, is the importance of promoting the welfare of your clients, and it's in our ethical codes. And one of the things that you mentioned here is, giving them a positive language to talk about their personality. A lot of our assessments are focused diagnostically on, and as you mentioned, sometimes that is necessary to have a diagnosis and a treatment plan, and third-party payers and insurance companies, HMOs, certainly require that. But our ethical codes require more than that, like promoting their welfare, which can go beyond symptom reduction to a positive experience. So I really appreciate that about the Enneagram as a tool. So speaking of which, how do you think the Enneagram book is helpful specifically for counselors as a tool? So a lot of new counselors may be watching this video thinking, okay, how can I use this in my work? Or how can I use your book in my work?
That's such a great question. I think that why it was helpful when my friend told me to go back, fellow counselor, and why it's helpful for you watching or listening perhaps is because once you determine which of the 9 types your client most resembles, you get a lot of interior information that you can check in about. And I say check in about because there's nothing future foretelling about the Enneagram. You have to make sure it's a fit. But when you do, like with any assessment, figure out whether they're a type 9 presentation or a type 3, you get a lot of root issues. You learn whether they're more of a gut instinct type or a heart type, and you learn what their core fears are. At least you have a really nice space to check in about that. And sometimes it would take me upwards of 3 months to really fully assess and get all of that intake information. And with the Enneagram, when somebody tells me, and sometimes they do, a lot of people know their type even before they meet us. Recently, a fellow marriage therapist was asking her very, very large 200K plus audience whether they knew the Enneagram, and about 70% did. And so it gave a language to say, oh, yeah, you're a 4. Okay, now I can check in with you about this or that. So I do have a free typing assessment on my website, enneagramandmarriage.com. If you're ever just looking for a way to tell, or you can go to trudy.com, where they have tests over 1 million people per month on various personality measures, including the Big 5 and the Myers-Briggs. And so the Enneagram being one of them, it gives you and your clients a little bit more insight to start with. And for me, it's a great fast track, knowing that on average, the sessions we'll get for couples work statistically, I'm not saying my work or yours, but it's 1 as the average number of sessions people get when they're starting out by some statistics. And so when you can go digging a little deeper from that first assessment session, where you're really allowing for attunement and also trying to figure out how you can help them, it gives you a better opportunity to let things stick and to give helpful guides to them.
Yeah, that's great. So, and amazing statistic, right? Just 1 session. So this is your one shot to really connect with the clients. And I hear you saying, if you can come in and have this assessment, have a tool, a language, and a way of diving deeper into who they are and how they tick, then perhaps they're more likely to return and persist in therapy.
Yeah, and even just do their work if they don't for some reason. Obviously, we know the therapeutic alliance is the most important, but just to know that you helped them and gave them some lift off. But we never want to overwhelm with our favorite tool, and allowing ourselves to read the nonverbals of where the conversation is going, of course, is important too. But many times people are like, oh, thank you. Like I just had a gentleman say this week, this is crazy that you know me so well. Thank you so much for speaking into our marriage this way. So a lot of times you get some great feedback.
Yes, and I appreciate the structure that provides. I remember the Prepare and Rich training, and you probably have used that as well, especially with premarital couples. Or you start with an assessment, and
Yeah.
then the couple comes in, and you go over the assessment with them, and then you sort of have the structured path to go down. And I think that can be really, really helpful for couples to have the anticipation of, oh, let's talk about what this type means, and let me understand this better, and unpack it. So a great tool to add to the counselor's toolkit. Um, so as we think about that tool and how it fits in context with the other tools, the ACA Code of Ethics, E6A, talks about instrument selection, the importance of using more than 1 assessment. So when I think of and by the way, thanks for sharing the free assessment. I'm sure that'll be a great resource for many people. And I think of tools that will go well with that, maybe the 5 love languages. Uh, One of the tools that I just worked with a statistician to develop, called the REST, the Relationship Styles Test, that helps people identify their attachment style. And there's a free copy, short version on my website as well. And then there's one in the book. But I think of those as sort of complementing each other well to show a full relational picture. What do you think?
I love that. And I think that being a lifelong learner in our relationships and our clients is really great for neuroplasticity, neurogenesis. So just giving our clients liftoff with several assessments can give them confidence that we care, we're not going anywhere. As you mentioned, there's a positive aspect to that too, where we can find their gifts. I know people like the strengths finders. Myself, I really like the Big Five assessment. I think that one, because it's using traits versus typing, it has more of a continuum, and you can see where you are on various measures like openness, conscientiousness. I like that too. It's the most scientifically validated out of all of them, at least empirically. I love yours. I have your book. I cannot wait to dig in. It's just a few days away from getting to read the full book. So excited. So obviously, I've loved Attachments by Clinton and Sipsey in the past. Now I'm
Yes.
can't wait for your book to be my new one. But I was going to also say, in addition to five love languages, many of my clients have really appreciated Truity, that company I mentioned earlier, truity.com. They have 7 love styles that they've adapted the 5 love languages from. And what I love about the 7 love styles is they understand the gift giving a little differently, that it's more about financial help versus just gifts. For that one, they've kind of assessed what people like more. And then they've also added in an intellectual piece, which I score very high in. That's one of my favorite things about talking with my husband, is that piece. And it was never identified with the others. And that's actually so comfortable for me that I could stay there almost all the time with him and feel so loved.
Mm,
So it was fun for me to see Trudy had just kind of added a bit to 5 love languages, but I like both.
interesting. Wow. So that's called the 7 love styles.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And truity.com is where people can find out more about that.
Yes, but I love Gary Chapman's 5 love
Oh,
languages. And that's,
yes.
of course, we have to just build around his amazing work there, because
Right.
that is what we need. So I'm glad to have, I know he supports your work, which is amazing. And he's been a pioneer for all of us in the romance area. So I'm just so grateful for those 5 love languages.
Yes, and it's so exciting even to uh, have be in that circle with you and Dr. Chapman and Gary Sibsey as well. That book by Tim Clinton and Gary Sibsey, Attachments, is one of the first ones that I read on the topic, and just similar to you, when I picked up that book, I never put down the topic of attachment. It just stuck with me. So that's definitely a great one to add to the counselor's bookshelf as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, so this is a good bundle of assessments that counselors can use. So we've got the 5 love languages, we've got the 7 love styles that goes a little deeper. We've got, what's the name of your Enneagram assessment again?
Um, Mine is just the E&M typing guide. So the
E and
Enneagram Marriage typing guide.
Typing Guide. Okay,
Yes.
great. I love that name, the E&M Typing Guide. Yes. And then the 4 relationship styles test, the rest. So you can find out what your attachment style is, or as we call it in that book, the relationship style. And I like the idea of using those together to give people a real picture of the landscape of their relationship, and seeing kind of how they resonate. I think one thing that's important to mention, I know we talked about this probably some on your podcast, which was this idea that the Enneagram is sort of a picture more of your personality and how you show up, whereas your attachment style, your relationship style, is a picture of how you show up during times of distress, because it's part of that attachment behavioral system. And so the attachment system is activated when we are experiencing distress.
Wow.
And I know you mentioned in your book how couples can shine brightly in some instances, or maybe their light can go dim, or there can be shadows in other instances. And that to me sound also a little bit similar to when your attachment system's activated, or what we talk about as being on the bottom of the circle with
Mhm.
attachment. Maybe when you're under stress, or you're triggered by something that reminds you of a trauma, and then you really need more like comfort and recharging from that safe haven and secure base. And then that's where you kind of see the styles. Do people move towards connection, like a networker? Do they move
Mhm.
away, like the security guard, where they sort of deactivate and are a bit more avoidant? Do they get a little hyperactivated and tangled up in it, like the investigator, where they're really reading all the cues and maybe overreading? Um, or a combination like the firefighter, where they're trying to fight all the fires. And I'm wondering, when you think about the different attachment styles, and you think about and I know you talk about attachment as well in your book, which I love seeing that as well. But would you say a little bit more about the way you see these things fitting together?
Oh, I love that because I also love a deep dive into our instincts. I talk about that in a chapter of my book as well, that our deepest desires and instincts and ways of feeling safe really inform our Enneagram type. As we both know, Bowlby's work and so many other attachment theorists have really helped to inform. Sue Johnson's marriage work has helped to inform finding safety together. Your beautiful work is helping us to have now a relational language that is a little less, I think, scary than some of the languages of past attachment. It just makes me feel so broken when I see some of the other language and hopeless. Like, this is you're disorganized, you're avoidant, you're neurotic, you're anxious. And so I love your new terms. It's just so life-giving to be able to move within when we're already needing self-soothing. How I think it works together is I think at the core reason why couples come in for work and why their Enneagram types are maybe in the lower levels or their attachment styles is they don't have proper ways for self-soothing. I think
Mhm.
regulation is extremely important.
Yeah.
I heard it recently said by an author who is a Pulitzer Prize winning author. He said marriage should be Anthony Doerr, who wrote All the Light. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get that title wrong. All the Light We Can't See. And he mentioned that marriage should be called something different before and after kids, because
Mhm.
kids just dysregulate you. So there's so many pieces that I think come back to regulation and self-soothing. And so I'm just excited to have these pieces that we can all be working for that same goal of helping everyone to feel better, so that they're not just in survival mode, but so that they can begin to thrive.
Yes. Okay. That I like that concept, because essentially attachment is regulation as well. The more research we've seen, the way people do attachment is the way they do emotion. So for example, if you're a networker and you love to connect, you move towards connection. So you also move towards emotion. If you have some sadness, you might lean into it and try to listen to what is the sadness really telling me, or what does it mean? Maybe it means I really value a relationship and I'm disappointed about things that are happening in it, or about a loss. Whereas if a person has a more of a security guard style, where they're sort of guarding their independence, um,
Yeah.
they're deactivating their relationship, kind of moving away. They're also moving away from emotion and minimizing that. Um, and so finding ways to soothe when a person's feeling, maybe they're, for the security guard, maybe their boundaries are encroached upon,
Hmm.
or they're perceived that they are, right? Um,
Yeah.
do you when you mention self-soothing, are there any strategies that come to mind, or techniques that you um, that are maybe go-tos that you use in your coaching work, or that you recommend for counselors?
Hmm. I think that I love the 10-second one that you've taught to me and others. And that has been great to learn from you, of picturing that safe person or place. I've often used John Gottman's work, where he has you take some time to do a body regulation and tense and release different areas of your body, and then picture a beautiful place. I've enjoyed some experiential techniques where we do some focusing and figure out what's really going on, while we take a look at one of our favorite rooms that has enough room for us to dig up and figure out what's really going on, and then to look at that with safety. For those who share my faith, sometimes even with Christ with us. But also the very basics of what I do with couples are I teach them about taking deep breaths and pausing, because quite honestly, many of the couples who see me are not students in this field. And so they don't know that. They don't need anything fancy. They just need the reminders to take a nice 4-second in, 4-second out deep breath. They need reminders to pause. And they, especially for the self-soothing as a couple, need the reminders that when you do need to go away for 20 minutes to get your heart rate regulated again, to let the partner know with a term of endearment, I'll be back, I'm coming back, or let's keep talking about this, but I'm not able to right now. Oh my gosh, the safety that comes from knowing we're not abandoned in our worst moments is just so healing.
Yes, isn't that amazing that just such a quick intervention, like saying, you know, I'm going to go into the bathroom for a moment. I will be right back. I'm coming back to this discussion, but I
Yeah.
just need a minute. Um, can make
Yeah.
all the difference in just storming out of the room. Um, yes. Wow. Thank you for sharing that bundle of resources and tools. I know counselors are always looking for more tools for the toolkit, so that's awesome. Um, so speaking of those tools, so this series of videos is for counselors seeking resources to serve their clients, or especially books to look to keep on the counselor's bookshelf. So as someone who's been a marriage and family therapist, counselor, coach, will you share some of your own favorite therapeutic books or resources from your bookshelf?
Yes, I really love Gottman's The Seven Principles for Making Marriage Work. I
Oh,
think that's
yes.
just an absolute great book for every counselor's bookshelf. We mentioned attachments in your book. And we also, I think it's really helpful to walk through some of Sue Johnson's techniques. Now, she has a book called Hold Me Tight, but I really enjoy actually watching Sue Johnson's style on YouTube even more because her language is, when you see her in person present, is so beautiful and attachment oriented that I think what couples need when you're trying to do the work with them is this safe presence. And so I even go back to some Carl Rogers videos when I'm training my Enneagram and marriage students, and I show them what it means to really listen with care and with concern. And so a couple of those are, just throwing in that as well. I do really like as a theoretical just basis, as I like Gary Thomas's Sacred Marriage. However, I think we're just continuing, like we said, with everybody else, we're building upon each other's work because he really reminds us that marriage is a ministry, it's a gift, it's about becoming holy together. And that was something that my Wheaton College supervisor reminded me of and gave me his book. But I also think that now we can add to that, like, okay, now that we do know it's a ministry and a gift, how can we still nuance farther? So I like adding an Enneagram learning too. And the book that helped me the most, as I mentioned earlier, when Wes and I got started, my husband and I, on our journey, and my first clients, was The Road Back to You by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile. That's a nice primer. And if you take an Enneagram assessment and you want some more information, because sometimes, like we all know, we take the assessment, we walk away. The Road Back to You was a great book for me to really see and to dig in. Okay, here's the struggles, here's the stresses, as you mentioned. And now we can understand and have some compassion for each other. And there's even a bit of a why are we like this to that book, so that there's not just a shaming or anything like that, but instead we're able to be invited into, okay, here's my partner, here's my client's partner, and here's perhaps why they developed in this maladaptive way that is irritating me right now. And also here's the beautiful reminder of their strengths.
Yeah, I like that. The way you said, here's my partner and here's how or why they developed in that maladaptive way, because I think that really demonstrates some compassion, to try to really understand. And, I think it's so critical to show compassion towards ourselves and others. It's really interesting. Some of the research that we're doing right now on attachment, we're finding that as people's self-compassion increases, their attachment related anxiety decreases. So another way of saying it is, as they
Oh,
get kinder to themselves, they're less anxious and stressed about their relationships, and of course more secure in their relationships. So really, really interesting that doing some, so just to add to that phenomenal list of resources you brought to mind, that some of the self-compassion exercises, I think I have a YouTube video on a self-compassion break, So maybe like a 5-minute meditation that can just help you to be kind to yourself,
Oh,
to reduce that anxiety and help you to be able to connect more. And of course, as counselors, we can create our own, as coaches, we can create our own meditations as well. And
yeah.
there's out there on YouTube. I think Kristen Neff also has some on her self-compassion workbook. But another thing you mentioned is that there are 45 different pairings of Enneagram couples. And
Mhm.
so, talking about the different patterns and the way people shine, would you share more about that? Maybe a personal example or other examples, and why it may be useful for people to find out what their pairing is like?
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. Because in addition to the basic tools we're talking about, when you can get the nuances of how somebody's behaving and really dig in a bit with these specifics, a really big light goes on for that couple to realize, oh my gosh, we're not alone, we're known, we're seen. Most of the time when people come to see us, they're like, are we the only ones? So I really like to remind couples of every pairing that everyone will go through just stages, but individually as in my book, I have all 45 couple pairings, the stages of a relationship that everyone goes through, the early shine into the shadows and immersing in and then coming back out. So for my own pairing, for instance, Wes and I'm a type 7 enthusiast. He's a type 1 who is more of the improver in the world, the perfectionist. Now, of course, we are more than that. Of course, we're not just that. But when we're looking at Enneagram, that's how we show up the biggest. And we know that about each other. And that means I have a heart of joy, but I can get scattered or anxious. And even we can laugh about that earlier today when you asked me that question, and I got very lost in it. And I was like, what was the rest of that question? Because I'm going to be a little bit on that hyper side. And I believe in your language, some of that was the investigator, right?
Yeah, so with a little bit of the yeah, tendency to look for clues, look at information, and maybe
Yeah.
tends to be more hyper and energetic rather than the security guard, which is more like hypoactive, right? Like a little more secluded, maybe disconnected.
Yes. And I love how you get that sometimes we shift. And so when I'm more stressed, I will shift back into the hypo, and then
Mm,
my husband has to come find me.
mm,
And so sometimes he and I, what we work on together is me staying in the middle a bit more and not being super hyper or avoidant.
mm.
And with him, he is more of that, like I said, improver, perfectionist. So he can search for what's wrong versus see the good that's already there, and he's an oldest child. So I also love the birth order overlay. And
Oh,
he's able to allow himself to notice, okay, let me look for the good in Krista. Let me find what's already good versus trying to always reform her. And sometimes our jobs are very conflated with these pieces. So, for instance, my clients don't like it when I step out of the 7 and I stop encouraging them and being very energized. Just as his patients, he's a medical provider, don't like it at all if he stops being detailed because he has to literally find a heart attack. And last night I heard him talking to a patient because he had to be on call and he was on the car and he's like, I'm not even in a private setting yet. But he had to tell somebody to put their oxygen on physically before they could even have a conversation. And so he has to be super detailed, and he has to be in that space. But sometimes we can bring our vocations all the way home when we need to be a bit lighter, have more fun, more playfulness. We need transitions. And so we're learning with our particular pairing that we can be overly serious, we can be overly thinking type and gut instinct type. And what's missing for us is that emoting and heart piece. And so we've kind of learned that that's one of our shadows. So we work on that by taking date nights every single week. And we work on that by telling each other when we have something hard to say and we're like, this isn't comfortable, I don't feel safe, but I need to say something that's going to help us to grow closer. And
mm.
instead of us sort of pushing each other or not physically, but just into uncomfortable spaces, we now try to respect, like, this is really hard work for our pairing. So we know that now because we've been doing our Enneagram work.
Oh, yeah. It sounds like it's led to a whole new level and layer of self-awareness about how you guys fit together and what comes more easily to you and what's harder. And oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can relate to you so much because uh,
Aw.
in a similar profession, and then my husband's also a physician, so so we have a
You get it, and the family can't be around for these conversations, but sometimes with these people that are in the medical field, it's nonstop. And so
right.
you see
Just
how
being
they
on
have to be
time.
detailed. They're saving lives.
Right. Yes. And they talk about the medical model. It's so based on it's so diagnostic, so based on having a diagnosis, seeing what the problems are, and interesting how we both value so much we understand that, but also value bringing the positive of what's going well, what's going right. And that's an interesting piece of the research too. You mentioned Gottman's work and the 7 principles for making marriage work, and one of the things that we've seen in the research is that couples that tend to make it for the long haul have this 5-to-1 ratio where they do have these 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative. So it creates this positive emotional environment. And I think part of that is really aligned with the enthusiast and seeing what's going well and expressing that enthusiasm and appreciation. And so it's interesting how that works. Thank you
Yeah,
for
it
sharing that.
does. Because our husbands help people to stay alive, and then we bring them quality of life. And I
Yes.
was laughing because John Gottman's relationship prescription book, which I'm not finished with yet, but I had to replay it 2 or 3 times, this one piece where they said 5-to-1 in conflict and then 20-to-1 in your regular everyday exchanges. And I was like, so we need to be 20-to-1 positive versus negative in everyday exchanges. So I've been sharing that with my couples a bit tentatively, but also, wow, just in this wow factor of how important positivity is in these turning towards behaviors. So I love that we can bring that while appreciating all those who are watching or listening who may relate more to that type 1 perfectionist who are like, my gifts are very important to this world too, just as important.
And Krista, as you're saying that, you're making me think how important is this ethically as we talk about promoting the welfare of our clients as our ethical obligation. And when oftentimes when couples come into therapy, there's a fixation on everything that's going wrong and talking about what's wrong. And even like some of the tools that Gottman suggests with love maps and fostering fondness and admiration and sharing what you appreciate about each other, using some of those tools and like the Enneagram tools or the relationship styles test, looking at how things work and how you show up from a positive perspective, to help create those positive experiences to help that ratio is so important. So I feel like your book is a great tool for counselors trying to foster that positive atmosphere, increase the positive ratio for their couples. So where can our viewers find out more about the Enneagram and marriage and your other books and resources?
Well, I have really tried to make it user-friendly, knowing a lot of your students are out there wanting podcasts, probably driving a good bit, some of them. So we also have lots of podcasts, as you heard us mention. So there's over 400 podcasts that I've walked through, and I try to talk about integrating other marriage tools, of course, as you can hear us here as well. But I go through all the types. I go through some of the deeper dives on the triads of the Enneagram, which are like heart, mind, body. I try to bring in the overlay of faith, which I think everything I do has the desire to be a reflection of Christ. And then I also want to remind you of at my website, I mentioned a bunch of freebies. If you go to our resources page, in addition to coaching training, in addition to counseling and coaching services, I have my own local counseling practice that I started over a decade ago with a local staff of counselors and coaches. And then I also enjoy making some, in addition to my book, some packets for each of the personality types if they just want to do a deep dive just on their type as well.
Mm, awesome. Okay. Thank you for sharing all those resources. And what about your social media? Would you invite people to follow you on your social media
Thank
accounts?
you. I would say that in addition to enneagramandmarriage.com, Instagram is the place I spend time Monday through Wednesday evening, and also some fun stories on Friday and through the weekend. I try to share just different pieces, like so it's not all clinical or even all heavy-handed marriage growth, but often just the fun too. So beginning of the week, teaching, later in the week at Instagram at Enneagram and Marriage, you'll find just some fun stories that show you how we're trying to live these principles out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Kristen. I recommend everyone get the book, The Enneagram in Marriage. Check out her website, follow her on social media. As you can see, she's a wealth of knowledge. I appreciate your enthusiasm. That is just contagious. And it's been such a joy and pleasure to talk with you today. Any final words or comments you'd like to share before we end our time together?
Thank you. You're an amazing host. You guys are so blessed to have her, as you all know, I'm sure. But that's the basics. And just to remember that when we do look at couples who are the healthiest, it is the couples who tell the healthiest narratives about their relationship, but also are aware of the weaknesses. So just keep that in mind as you walk through your own life. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, yes, that's great. Yeah, awareness is so important, and we're always trying to promote that. And as Mr. Rogers mentioned when we were all much younger, that whatever is mentionable is manageable. So having that space to talk about those things and know your unique typing, it's so valuable. And so I'll just close with some words from Mr. Rogers, which is that you've made this day a special day just by your being you. There's no one else in the world like you, and I like you just the way you are. So we hope this gives you some concepts to contemplate. Until next time, God bless you guys.
God bless. Thank you. Oh, that was so good. You are so good at this. Thank you so much.